Welcome to KOT Aero, knowledge on tap for the aerospace community. Subscribe for free at kotaero.com. All right, let's dive into it.
Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. Ready for takeoff today?
Always.
Well, we're diving into the world of airplane lavatories.
Fascinating.
Maybe not glamorous, but definitely important, right? We've got a brand new rule from the DOT, the Department of Transportation, that's going to make a big difference for passengers with disabilities.
You know, it's interesting. We've seen so many innovations in aviation over the years, but one thing that hasn't really changed much is the accessibility of lavatories, particularly on single-aisle aircraft, the kind most of us fly on all the time.
Yeah, those workhorse planes.
Exactly. And here's the thing. These planes are being used more and more for long-haul flights, even though those lavatories have never actually been required to be accessible.
Which is wild when you think about it. I mean, picture yourself on a flight 4, 5, even 6 hours and not being able to use the lavatory comfortably.
Or at all, even.
Exactly. It's a problem that a lot of people face right now.
And the DOT's own data shows just how much this is an issue. They've tracked the percentage of long flights, those between 1,500 and 3,000 miles, that are being flown on these single-aisle aircraft. Back in 1991, it was under 40%.
Okay.
Now, a whopping 86%.
So the need for accessible lavatories has really skyrocketed, along with that increase in those longer flights.
Exactly. And that's where this new DOT rule comes in. It's all about addressing this problem, both in the short term and the long term.
We've actually got a copy of the document here from the Federal Register, and let me tell you, it's a bit of a dense read.
It's not exactly light bedtime reading.
No, but you know us, we love a good deep dive, so we're going to unpack it all for you. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, can you paint a picture for our listeners? What does this lack of accessibility actually mean for passengers with disabilities? How does it impact their lives?
Well, imagine for a moment that you're so worried about not being able to use the lavatory comfortably that you actually dehydrate yourself before a long flight.
Oh.
Or think about having to rely on adult diapers simply because the onboard facilities just aren't usable.
It's hard to even imagine.
And some people, they just give up on flying altogether.
It's heartbreaking to think about those situations.
It really is. This rule is about so much more than just convenience, It's about basic human dignity and the freedom to travel without facing these incredible barriers.
So well said. Okay, let's get into the details of this new rule. What's actually changing?
Well, it's a two-pronged approach, really. First, you've got short-term solutions. These are all about improving the existing lavatory interiors, making them more usable. And those changes start phasing in pretty soon, in October 2026.
Okay.
And then you've got the long-term solutions, which are going to require a much more fundamental redesign of those lavatories. And that's for new aircraft that are ordered after October 3, 2033, or delivered after October 2, 2035.
Okay, so two different timelines there. Let's start with those short-term improvements, the ones that are coming up sooner. What can passengers expect to see in the next few years?
The focus there is really on making the best use of the existing lavatory space, making it more functional. So the rule requires things like grab bars, to help with stability.
Right.
Accessible faucets and controls, so you don't need a lot of strength or dexterity to use them.
That makes sense.
Better maneuvering space for onboard wheelchairs, visual barriers to increase privacy.
So it's not about making the lavatories themselves physically bigger just yet, but about making the space they already have work better for people with disabilities.
Exactly. And it's important to note that airlines won't have to retrofit all their planes all at once.
Okay.
But any new lavatory installed after that date, October 2, 2026, it'll have to meet these new accessibility standards.
So it's a phased-in approach.
Exactly.
Now, something else I noticed in this document that I thought was interesting was the emphasis on training and information. What's the thinking behind that?
That's a really crucial part of this whole rule.
Yeah.
So flight attendants, they're going to be getting much more hands-on training on how to assist passengers with disabilities.
Right, like helping them to and from the lavatory.
Exactly, including using the onboard wheelchairs.
Yeah.
But here's what I think is really important for your listeners, especially if they're planning a trip. Airlines are going to have to provide really detailed, flight-specific information about the accessibility of the lavatories on each flight.
Oh, that's great.
So you'll be able to find this information online on the aircraft itself. It'll help you to plan your trip much better.
That's fantastic. So we're talking about both physical changes to the lavatories and improvements to the whole support system for passengers with disabilities.
Exactly. It's a holistic approach.
Yeah.
It recognizes that accessibility is not just about the physical space. It's about the information, the assistance that's available to passengers.
Okay, so we've covered those short-term solutions. What about the long term? What's on the horizon for, say, around 2035? What are the big changes there?
Well, the long-term changes, those are really about getting to the heart of the problem,
Okay.
the size of the lavatories themselves.
Oh,
So the DOT, they're saying that for all these new single-aisle aircraft, the ones ordered after October 3, 2033, or delivered after October 2, 2035,
right.
they have to have at least one lavatory that's big enough.
Big enough for.
Big enough to accommodate a passenger and an assistant,
Yeah.
both the size of a 95th percentile male,
Okay.
using an onboard wheelchair.
Wow. Okay, so that's a really significant increase in space.
It is.
That's going to require a lot of rethinking of airplane design.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that timeline. Why 2035? That seems like a long way off.
It does seem like a ways away. Initially, the DOT actually proposed an even longer timeline, something like 18 to 20 years out.
Wow. Okay.
But there was a lot of pushback, especially during the public comment period.
Who's pushing back?
A lot of different stakeholders, disability rights advocates, passengers with disabilities themselves, saying, look, 2 decades, that's just too long to wait for such a basic change.
Right.
They made a really strong case that accessible lavatories, these aren't just a nice to have, they're a necessity.
Yeah, if you want to participate in air travel like everyone else.
Exactly.
So it sounds like the DOT really listened to those concerns and moved up that timeline.
They did. I think it's really important to acknowledge that. They recognized the urgency of this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's be realistic for a minute. I mean, these changes, they're going to cost money.
Oh, yeah.
Did the DOT address that, the economic side of things?
They did. Yeah, they did a really thorough analysis of the costs and benefits. And their main focus was on that potential loss of revenue for airlines.
Okay.
Because obviously, if you're going to have a larger lavatory, you might need to remove some seats.
Now, how many seats are we talking about here?
Their initial estimate was an average of about 3 seats per aircraft. But, that could vary, obviously, depending on the aircraft model, the specific lavatory design.
Okay, so potentially 3 seats gone. Does that automatically mean higher ticket prices?
It's possible. The DOT, they estimated that by 2060, when all aircraft are expected to have these accessible lavatories, domestic passengers could see, on average, about a $2.54 increase per ticket.
Okay.
International passengers, a little higher, $12.28.
Okay, so not insignificant, but I remember you saying earlier that the overall economic impact might not be as huge as people think.
That's right. Because, yes, removing seats, that is a loss of potential revenue. But airlines, they could offset some of those losses by increasing fares just slightly across the board. And the DOT's analysis, it actually suggests that the net revenue impact on airlines, it could range from a small loss to even a small gain.
So it might not be as simple as fewer seats equals higher prices for everyone.
Exactly. There are a lot of other factors that play into it. The overall demand for air travel, passengers' willingness to pay a little bit more.
Right, for that kind of inclusive experience.
Exactly.
Sounds like the DOT is betting that those benefits of accessibility outweigh the costs.
They are.
But I'm sure some people would say, look, this is too expensive. It's too burdensome for the airlines. Did the DOT address those concerns at all?
They did. They acknowledged that, yes, there are costs, but they also emphasized that accessible lavatories, these aren't just a matter of convenience.
Right.
It's about a basic human right. It's essential for ensuring that people with disabilities can participate in society.
Absolutely.
And travel freely.
This is a really powerful statement. It sounds like they're really trying to shift that conversation away from the economics and more towards the social and ethical side of this.
Exactly. They're challenging that idea that accessibility is a luxury, something that airlines can choose to provide or not.
Right.
It's a core value. It should be integrated into how we design aircraft from the very beginning.
That's a big shift in thinking. So we've talked about the what and the when of these new rules. What about the how? How are airlines and manufacturers actually going to implement this? What are some of the challenges, logistical design challenges, that they might face?
That's a great question. It's easy to, write a rule, put it on paper, but it's a whole other thing to put it into practice, especially when you're talking about, something as complex as airplane design.
Yeah, how do you actually re-engineer an airplane?
The DOT acknowledges that this is not going to be easy, especially creating these larger lavatories on single-aisle aircraft.
Right.
It's going to require a lot of collaboration between airlines and manufacturers, a lot of creative problem solving. And probably a lot of innovation.
So where do you even begin with that? What are some of the biggest hurdles they're going to have to overcome?
Well, the most obvious one, I think, is space.
Hmm.
Single-aisle aircraft, they're not exactly known for being spacious.
No.
So figuring out how to fit in a lavatory that meets these new size requirements without getting rid of too many seats, that's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, I can picture the engineers right now hunched over their blueprints trying to figure out how to make every inch count.
That's right. And that's actually where the DOT's approach gets really interesting.
Oh.
Instead of mandating very specific design requirements,
Right.
they've set what they call performance standards.
Okay, can you explain what that means? I'm not an engineer.
Sure. So instead of saying the lavatory must be this exact size and shape,
Right.
they're saying the lavatory must be able to accommodate these specific needs.
Okay.
So they're giving manufacturers more flexibility.
So it's more about the functionality than the exact form.
Exactly. And that's where the innovation comes in. We could see some really creative solutions emerge from this, designs that we haven't even thought of yet.
That's kind of exciting. So it's almost like this rule could push the industry forward in terms of design.
I think so. And the DOT, they're really encouraging this kind of collaborative approach.
Okay.
Airlines, manufacturers, disability advocates, passengers, everyone needs to be at the table
Makes sense.
to figure out solutions that really work.
Yeah, you've got to get input from the people who are going to be using those lavatories.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think this could lead to some really positive side effects.
Yeah.
Not just for passengers with disabilities, but for everyone.
Oh, how so?
Well, think about it. If we're asking manufacturers to rethink lavatory design from scratch,
Right?
maybe they come up with innovations that make them more comfortable, more functional for all passengers. Maybe we'll see more efficient use of space, better lighting, more ergonomic designs.
You're right. This could be a win-win for everyone. It seems like this one small change, this focus on accessible lavatories, it could have this ripple effect through the whole airline industry.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that accessibility, it's not just about following the rules.
Right.
It's about creating a better experience for everyone.
Well said. I think this has been a really interesting deep dive. We've gone from these, cramped and often inaccessible spaces to this vision of a future where air travel really is for everyone.
It really is a shift.
And to think that something as seemingly simple as a lavatory can be the catalyst for such a big change.
Absolutely. And the exciting thing is that these changes are coming soon. I think as more passengers start seeing these improvements, it'll be interesting to see how the whole travel experience evolves.
Absolutely. So next time you're booking a flight, keep an eye out for those accessibility details. You might be surprised at what you find.
You might?
Maybe you'll even get to experience one of these new, amazing lavatories for yourself.
That's right.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.